You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got a ruling that will absolutely impact Donald Trump's New York trial. An appeals court has reinstated his gag order. So, what are the implications of this decision?
Well, Trump is again gagged in New York. The appellate court temporarily put a stay or a pause on the gag order while the appeal began working its way through the system. Now, mind you, the gag order is still on appeal, but the appellate court reviewed basically the mountain of threats, the paperwork that was submitted to the appellate court by Tish James' attorneys saying, listen, judges, while you're considering this appeal, the gag order needs to remain in place because look at the threats that Donald Trump's attacks on the judge's clerk have inspired. And the appellate court thought better of it. And they said, you know what? We're putting it back in place. They lifted the pause. And now Donald Trump, once again, is prohibited from talking about or posting about Judge Engoron's clerk.
Why was this gag order paused in the first place?
I think once a gag order is put in place, it is so unusual. Gag orders are rarely issued in criminal cases or in civil cases. It's so unusual that I think the whole system gets a little uncomfortable. So what they do is they say, look, we're going to just kind of maintain the status quo. We're going to pause the gag order while we take this issue up on appeal. And we try to decide whether the existing case law in New York supports not only the imposition of a gag order, but the nature of this gag order, the boundaries of it. But then I think when Tish James' attorneys made such a compelling case about the flood of threats that came pouring in, I mean, they documented something like 20 to 30 calls to the judge's clerk's cell phone, leaving threatening, vile, vulgar, racist, dangerous messages every day. And another, I think, 50 to 60 emails and social media posts. And there is a unit in New York called the Judicial Threats Assessment Unit. They assessed a whole bunch of these threats and they believe them to be credible threats. I mean, Donald Trump was really endangering the judge's law clerk. I think at that point, the appellate court threw up its hands, said, you know what, better safe than sorry. There is an absolute case that has been made for the need, for this gag order to remain in place while the case works its way through the appellate process, which can take some time, and the judge reinstated it.
Now, I think obviously the facts are important here and they've been distorted and will continue to be distorted. Can you explain what this gag order covers? Because it's not all of Donald Trump's speech, despite what he may claim.
It's very narrow. It's very limited. So it doesn't protect Judge Engoron against Donald Trump's dangerous, reckless rhetoric or posts. It doesn't protect the witnesses. It doesn't protect Attorney General James or her staff, her attorneys that are pursuing this civil fraud case against Donald Trump. It only limits Donald Trump from speaking about, posting about the judge's court staff, the career public servants who, pretty much every day are toiling away in anonymity behind the scenes, trying to keep the New York judicial system moving forward. I mean, there really is no reason to comment on these people, and nobody would even know who they were, but for Donald Trump attacking them in his speech and in his posts. But it's a very modest gag order, the scope of it. That is the only thing it prohibits Donald Trump from doing, speaking or posting about the judge's staff.
Glenn, the fines that have been levied thus far are for $5,000 and $10,000. That's not going to do it when it comes to Donald Trump. So when a judge imposes sanctions, is there a standard that they have to abide by that's the same for everyone? Or can it be commensurate with the wealth of the defendant? Because 10K ain't gonna deter Trump from doing anything.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brian. When the fines were imposed, $10,000, $5,000, you could almost hear Donald Trump just telling somebody to, run up to Trump Tower and rummage around the couch cushions and bring back the 15K to satisfy these piddly little fines. But to answer your question, the fines can absolutely be commensurate with the ability of the defendant to pay. So if you have an indigent defendant, somebody with no money, who is involved in some kind of litigation and violates a court order, the court is not going to impose a $10,000 fine, a $25,000 fine. But for a millionaire or Donald Trump, who may be a thousandaire in reality, I know he likes to claim he's a billionaire, but he always exaggerates his wealth. The judge could easily begin to literally up the ante. We could see a $50,000 fine. We could see a $100,000 fine or more. And I do think that the courts will take into account whether this was a reasonable fine to impose, given the wealth of the person on whom it's being imposed. So, yeah, the judge has a lot of leeway to do what the judge believes is right and what the judge believes might be enough to deter Donald Trump from continuing to violate court orders. Of course, we've been here before, and it seems like Donald Trump will be unlikely to be deterred by anything, perhaps short of seeing the inside of a jail cell.
Right. Agreed. Glenn, I want to circle back to something that you were discussing before. Donald Trump made his comments about Judge Engoron's clerk immediately thereafter, and this is according to a security captain's sworn statement at the court, a court security captain's sworn statement. Last week, she did receive 20 to 30 calls per day to her personal cell phone, 30 to 50 messages across social media and to her email. She's received enough harassing voicemails to fill a transcript with 275 single-space pages, and about half of those were disparaging messages or anti-Semitic messages. Donald Trump's lawyers then came forward and argued that while these calls were reprehensible, Donald Trump shouldn't be muzzled because of other people's bad behavior. So had nothing to do with Donald Trump. Can I have your response to what is maybe the most disingenuous argument that I've ever heard?
Yeah, that dog won't hunt. And the appellate court judges have already said they are not buying that argument. So I was in court when the gag order in the DC case was being argued. And Trump's attorneys made this exact point. They said, Judge, the defendant, Donald Trump, didn't directly threaten anyone. Judge Millett said, wait a minute. There is a clearly established pattern. Donald Trump posts things about the witnesses, and witness threats follow. So, Donald Trump's lawyers can keep trying to hang their argument on that broken peg that Donald Trump isn't responsible for how his missives are received by his foot soldiers. But think about this, Brian. When the defense lawyers say Donald Trump didn't directly threaten anyone, let's think about what is really just astoundingly historic moment in our nation's history. January 6th, when a president posted about his own vice president, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what was necessary by inference to keep me, Donald Trump, in presidential power. Was that a threat, a direct threat? No. How did his supporters respond? They instantly broke out in chants of hang Mike Pence. So that's why I say that dog won't hunt. And the good news is the appellate court judges are so dismissive of that argument that they're not having any of it.
Yeah. All right, let's finish off with this. And if anybody's watched my videos before, I think you recognize that I believe deeply in repetition to get our message across. So to that end, Glenn, can you explain why this gag order, even a narrow one, as you were explaining, still is not an infringement on Donald Trump's First Amendment rights?
First of all, you don't have the right to threaten anyone, right? The First Amendment, generally speaking, yields. It does not protect true threats. That is language that is intended to and likely to inspire imminent violence. That kind of language, even absent a court proceeding, does not enjoy First Amendment protection. But once you're in court and the judge has a responsibility, a duty to protect and preserve the due administration of justice in a case, whether civil or criminal, your First Amendment rights yield even further, because the judge needs to make sure that the trial results are reliable, that they will be viewed as legitimate, and that they are untainted by the bad behavior, the threatening conduct of any of the litigants, any of the parties to the case. So no, these gag orders do not violate the First Amendment. They're actually an important check against somebody who would use his speech and his posts to interfere in a court proceeding.
Perfectly put. We'll leave it there. Obviously, we'll stay on top of this, not if, but when Donald Trump violates this now newly imposed gag order, this reimposed gag order. So if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.